We hope that you have had a chance to watch our previous video, which was the bottom 5 of the top 10 greatest artists and honorable mentions. Now we have the top 5 artists, and we're going to get right to it.
Number 5.
Number 5, Joe Kubert. That's right, I said Joe Kubert.
When I think of Joe Kubert, I think of things like the Viking Prince in Brave and the Bold. One of my favorite covers in there is like Brave and the Bold 22, which is a wash tone cover. When I think of Joe Kubert, I think of Sergeant Rock. So anything that Joe Kubert did with Sergeant Rock
Right.
in Our Army at War. A classic cover, for instance, would be number 112 with what they refer to as the Brady Bunch or the roster cover. When I think of Joe Kubert, I think of Hawkman, Brave and the Bold 34, 35, 36. And then when I think of Joe Kubert, I think of Tarzan reboot in the 1970s.
Yeah, the DC version of Tarzan. DC got it and kept the numbering the same as a former publisher. The first issue is not number 1, but if you ever want to see his first issue on Tarzan, Tarzan number 207.
When I think of Joe Kubert, one of my favorites, and this is really niche-y now, is Tor. I love the St. John's Tor. Like Tor number 4 is a great example of that. Joe Kubert was doing stuff even predating what I'm talking about. So like here's an example. Here's Flash number 86, which is the first appearance of Black Canary, is what the issue's famous for. But here's a great Joe Kubert Flash cover where the Flash is fighting a dinosaur, it looks like.
It's such good work. I like dinosaur covers, and this one's an exceptional dinosaur cover. So, and also a book I'm familiar with. By the way, he gets a little bit of heat for having what some would term as scratchy work. And there were times that his lines were much finer than others, like in this case on this Flash Comics. I wouldn't call that scratchy in any shape or form. Later on, his stuff did look, more sketchy. I personally really liked his Star Spangled War Stories work. I really liked those covers, and I liked the stories that were going on there. I liked the Unknown Soldier run that he was in. Weird War Tales, I'll show some Weird War Tale covers that he did. There were some other celebrated horror artists that did covers for Weird War Tales, but I'll tell you, Joe Kubert was no slouch, held his own all day long, and some of his covers are some of the best. So yeah, and Tarzan. I mean, not only am I a fan of that, I actually have that entire run, all in incredibly high grade. And let me tell you, I have them tucked away somewhere deep. I don't even know where they are, because I sell comics, but I'm not selling those because I love Tarzan.
What about the Kubert School of Art, right? So like,
yeah,
he went on, not only did he have this incredible body of work, but then he goes on to become opens a school, and many successful comic artists go to his school. Let's say all you collect is Silver Age Marvel. You probably haven't been exposed to Joe Kubert's work, right? He's a DC guy, right? I mean, he did some work at St. John's, and he's done some other work, but he's predominantly known as a DC artist and predominantly not known as a superhero artist. He's done covers for superhero titles, but that's not what he's known for. He's known for all these war books and Hawkman and things like that, and I just think he's fantastic.
Yeah, and he also covered the gambit of doing heroes, doing fantasy, doing horror. He was not one-dimensional, and he worked for a long time.
Yeah.
He spanned decades of time in comic books. But you're probably ready for number 4.
Number 4.
Number 4, Frank Frazetta. We debated this a little. I mean, if we were going to do it, because his body of work is the smallest of anyone we're discussing today.
But boy, talk about a heavy hitter, right? Weird Science Fantasy 29. Arguably one of his best known covers. In fact, there are people who've said it's one of the best comic book covers of all time. I don't believe it's
I agree. I'm in that.
I don't believe it's the best, but I own a copy of this and I love it. And
I would say it's in the top 20 covers of all time.
It's a good one, and his Famous Funnies, oh my goodness, Famous Funnies.
Any
214.
Any of his run, actually.
Famous Funnies 213.
Yeah,
Famous
amazing.
Funnies 212. Gorgeous books. Brutally expensive to buy, like in any kind of collectible, higher grade.
They still increase in price year over year. They're still heavily sought. There's not enough of them to go around in any condition. What was his latest work? I know he did some magazine stuff. He did some war magazine stuff.
Well, he did that. He did some stuff for Warren, so like creepy and eerie covers, right. and those are fantastic. Vampirilla #1 cover. It's iconic.
One of the best ever.
I mean, I can't imagine that anybody's going to have a top 10 list of the greatest comic artists of all time, and Frank Frazetta is not going to be somewhere on that list.
Yeah, I'm just really grateful that this well-accepted artist who sold oil paintings, his oil paintings go for 7 figures, that this artist came to comic books and shared this craft. And so many people emulated him and admired him, and they riffed back and forth on covers. Frank Frazetta, number 4.
Number 3.
At number 3, Alex Shamberg.
You and I can't really afford to buy comics with Alex Shamberg covers, right?
Yeah.
You know, we have a representative book as we're talking about these, and so we have a picture of Marvel Mystery Comics number 24 here.
It's just so good.
But there's so many of them that are so good, right? This is just one. It's probably not his best, but it's just representative of his work. Golden Age Timely Comics and Alex Shamberg just seem to go hand in hand with each other. There's a lot of people who could talk about Alex Shamberg and his contributions to comic books far better than us.
Yeah, that's true.
But he's so well known that even those of us who don't collect his books know how important he was to the golden age of comics.
There was no way we're making a list like this without Alex Shamberg being on there. And I think one of those things is Danny and I have a pretty wide palette, and we look at the comic hobby from its inception to now. So across the span of comic books, Alex Shamberg had quite an impact, especially his World War II covers. Or how about Submariner, you know, like kicking some serious...
He drew Submariner like he was a giant, too.
Right. He was just like, he just looked like, I don't know, that their version of Galactus or something, you know. So Alex Shamberg, number 3 with a bullet. And now... the top 2.
Number 2.
Number 2, Neil Adams. Now, I'll have you know that we went back and forth on what placement Neil Adams should have.
You know Neil Adams was going to be in the top 5, so where was he going to be?
Do you? I mean, I don't know. Someone watching this might be into modern books and not really understand the impact Neil Adams had.
But we're doing greatest of all time.
Yep.
And that's why, like, for instance, Alex Shamberg is on the list. I wish I could afford to buy Golden Age, high-grade Alex Shamberg covers, but I can't. But we recognize who the great artists are because we're comic fans, right? Neil Adams was so impactful. He brought to DC a sense of modern art and realism, and took DC from being the silly, kind of dated covers to some of the very best covers that came out in the Silver and Bronze Age, regardless of publisher. Like, when you think of, say, Batman, right? The greatest Batman artist of all times, Neil's got to be in the conversation. We're looking at a picture of Batman 227, which is an homage to, I think, Detective Comics number 31. That cover is so popular with collectors.
Including me.
There are Marvel,
just so you know,
Marvel Comics collectors who will collect only Batman from DC.
Right.
Because
no DC
except Batman, right?
Yeah.
He was the first artist to make Batman, I think, even remotely like the Batman that we know today.
Greatest detective on earth, hip but not cheesy. Yeah.
His cover for Superman 233, iconic, right?
Absolutely.
Just absolutely iconic. He did Green Lantern, Green Arrow 76 and made this fantastic run in Green Arrow from that era. In fact, arguably Green Lantern 76 started the Bronze Age.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And that era is my favorite era of comics. But Neil Adams, for decades, was just turning out work that was realistic.
And look at the different genres, right? Like horror, superheroes, right? His covers on Tomahawk are just sick.
If you're not familiar with Neil Adams' Western covers, we're showing you some now. They're exceptional. And he is a guy that knew when he left this plane of existence that he was incredibly impactful. He knew that. He didn't get paid what some other artists got later on, and he was a little upset about that as a human being.
But he fought for artists' rights and fought for pay and fought for them to keep their own art and to get paid for their work. I mean, he was an advocate for those things.
He definitely deserves to be in this top 10 list, and we put him at number 2. I think some of this might be interchangeable depending on your tastes, but long live Neil Adams.
We could sit here and gush about Neil Adams, but I just think that in comparison to the artists we're going to say next, There's nobody in his tier.
Number 1.
The number one artist, greatest artist of all time, is
Jack the King Kirby.
Jack the King Kirby. Now, you might be saying, what? We'd like to tell you what. You may not even realize, and some of you know exactly what we're talking about. You may not realize how impactful Jack Kirby really was. Jack Kirby's mind is embellished on you if you're a Marvel fan, because just about every great Marvel hero was designed by Jack Kirby. We're going to talk about a couple.
Well, let's just start, and this isn't his first piece of work, but
Nope.
Captain America #1, 1941.
And Bucky too.
That's a Jack Kirby book.
How's,
right?
how's that? So we're going to start off with Jack Kirby, World War II era comic books, and Jack Kirby designs Captain America. And you'd think, wow, that's Captain America's had multiple movies. He still has multiple comic books being published every month. That would have been a lot for an artist. But Jack Kirby was just getting warmed up.
Oh, yeah. So Jack Kirby comes, I think Young Romance was the very first romance comic, and that was a Simon and Kirby. The Manhunter and Boy Commandos from DC. So he was doing stuff at DC. He was doing stuff at Timely. We get into the 50s. He was doing all kinds of Challengers of the Unknown, which in my opinion is basically like a warm-up for Fantastic Four.
Right.
He was doing, backup stories in, My Greatest Adventure and other stuff. And then, bam, the Marvel Age of Comics comes out. Who did Fantastic Four #1? Jack
Back up.
Kirby. Who did the cover for AF-15? Jack Kirby.
How about Hulk #1?
You're right.
I mean, Hulk #1.
Right.
Hello, anyone like Hulk? Jack Kirby designed him.
X-Men #1.
X-Men #1. He is the GOAT. I mean,
Journey to Mystery '83. Thor. Jack Kirby.
it's like, you may not like Jack Kirby. Maybe, you've looked at some of his work, because I was telling Danny, when I was growing up, Jack Kirby was not my favorite. I like Neil Adams, and I like some other stuff. And we were into also some science fiction magazines, and other things that we saw a lot of art. So there's lots of artists I like.
But come on, too, the
Jack
stories.
Kirby, but Jack Kirby always made people look like they were square. I mean, square fingers, square head.
Oh, yeah. He's the opposite of Matt Baker when it came to drawing women.
I always liked his women personally. I love me a Jack Kirby woman.
Big Barda.
Yeah, yes.
The stories that Jack Kirby was involved in are really some of the great. Look at the whole Galactus trilogy. Fantastic Four 48, 49, 50. He's designing Galactus. He's designing what the Silver Surfer looks like.
I don't know if anyone's ever going to be as impactful as him again.
And then and there's things we're not even mentioning in his Marvel contributions. But then he jumps over to DC and does Commandy and New Gods and Forever People and creates the whole fourth world type of storyline and story arcs. And then he jumps back to Marvel and gets back on Captain America and comes out with Devil Dinosaur. I mean, his body of work is massive. Some of the things that he's done, it's come to light over the years that he was plotting the FF. Stan was scripting it.
Right.
Stan got the writing credits in the books. But Jack Kirby was plotting those books. The FF is arguably, those first 100 issues are arguably the best run of comic books ever created, right?
Yeah, this is before X-Men was even popular.
X-Men didn't hold a candle to FF during the 60s.
Justice League was the biggest thing going before this. I mean, so it was like Jack Kirby comes along with these mutants, that he's drawing. And by the way, they changed the way they looked pretty fast.
I just think that if somebody thinks that Jack Kirby isn't the GOAT, I'd love to hear in the comments, who they think is, because he just did so much work that's so good and he was so impactful. And, it's interesting because when you look at this list too, here's another fantastic writer, right? His imagination, his ideas were the Silver Age Marvels.
He definitely took it to the science fiction level.
Everything that happened in the Silver Age Marvel that's still today being used in movies and stuff, Kirby had a piece to do with that.
And let's say he did nothing but design these characters. Okay, he designed some slappers, you know what I'm saying?
Slappers.
I mean, some of the biggest characters that are still, some of the biggest characters. But that is it. That's our top 10.
In conclusion, before we end.
In conclusion.
I think it's really important to say this isn't scientific, right? We didn't take
not?
no, we didn't take any kind of like circulation numbers and do a giant poll. This is just
We're
two
geeks.
brothers
We're two geeks.
who get together and said, if we were going to talk about the 10 greatest comic artists of all times, who would we come up with? So this is our list. I would love to hear where people think their list would be different, because all of this is subjective.
Yep. And let us know, too, if there's someone we didn't mention, or if there's someone that we did mention you've never heard of, and maybe you're really interested in their work. We're really always excited about keeping the hobby interesting and alive.
I'll bet you there's somebody who thinks that some of the artists that we didn't even like bring up, like Mike Kaluta is one of the great.
He was in our discussion, by the way.
Or Jim Aparo as a great Batman artist. I mean, I don't feel that those guys measured up to that top 20 or whatever.
I really like the Jim Aparo Spectre run, though.
Oh, yeah.
In Adventure Comics. And like I said, this list could have been huge, and we do appreciate other artists.
But, as far as modern stuff goes, my concern is going forward in the future is, where are the lines between using computer imaging and an actual artist's talent to create art? Because these artists that we're talking about, like, you could buy pages of original art, Jack Kirby art or Neil Adams art, and you could see the line work. But like nowadays, everybody's doing stuff, digitally, and they're using tools to embellish their work. And I feel like personally, it's good work. There's a lot of artists like Art Germ and others who are really popular. Like Adam Hughes. We didn't bring up Adam Hughes at all in this discussion. And there's going to be somebody out there who thinks he might be one of the best artists. And it's just, I just feel personally that like the art is starting to transform into something that's different than just an artist's talent, because they're using all these tools to embellish their art through computers and such.
And some of my favorite artists weren't even mentioned here. Some of the artists that I really collect.
Like Richard Corbin.
Yeah, Richard Corbin is in my top artists of all time, and several others. So, I think it's really, really subjective on what kind of art you like. But we also tried not to just be fanboys here and say the people we liked. We went from our experience and knowledge. And there's a lot of it. You can talk to two people who know a lot about comics, and then talk to two more, and they know a lot about comics, and all four of them get together, and they all know different things. So it's an amazing thing when you get to a community of comic book people, and you have people that are interested and curious about comics, how much you can learn just by listening. That's why I like YouTube so much. It gives you an opportunity to do that.
The best thing about these lists, and when we do videos like this, is like, if we've mentioned something that somebody's not familiar with and they go out and look at it and they become interested because of it, then this has been successful, having this conversation.
So we hope you enjoyed it, and let us know what you think. But until next time, thank you.